Jacobs, and I will be discussing the evolution of life as I mentioned in my research paper. So, introduction and background information. A direct quote that I used directly from my research paper was different habitats in nature have many different species and groups of modern animals. In the fossil record, many species that have died out over time. Charles Darwin described why some species die out and the stronger and more adaptable species continue. Through Darwin's eyes, we can better understand how natural selection causes these changes. So, natural selection, for a lack of better terms, is the dying out of animals that are considered weaker in the wild to formate a new and stronger group. Natural selection can occur at the physical level as well as inside of us. It is physical and metaphysical. So, Charles Darwin and his book, The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection by Charles Darwin. Through this first chapter, we see how organisms struggle for resources and therefore the strongest and most adaptable to the environment in which they live and survive. I included a direct quote from Darwin's abstract. In his first chapter, he focused on the variation for domestic animals. Variation for domestic animals, in simpler terms, was Darwin's way of analyzing concepts like the use and disuse of traits and how the environment might cause variation in organisms. In his next chapter, he writes about the struggle for existence. Through this chapter, we see how organisms struggle for the resources and therefore the strongest and most adaptable to the environment in which they live and survive. I included another direct quote, reiterated it from the first one. It is from his abstract again. I thought that this was a very influential point in Darwin's introduction to the origin of species. In his fourth chapter, he touches on how natural selection causes extinction in less improved animals. By less improved animals, Darwin means the organisms that might not be the most fit in a species or group within a certain habitat. In order to survive, these organisms need to be fit to their environment. By fit, Darwin means the most adaptable and resourceful. Organisms that are not fit to their environment will end up dying out within their habitats or even species because of their lack of resourcefulness as well as fitness. In his four succeeding chapters, Darwin touches on the topics and transition of organisms, hybrinisms, and geological record. When understanding hybrinism particularly, Darwin explains that hybrinism is the production of offspring that is genetically dissimilar to the parent. So, hybridism meaning that there are two organisms which are pretty much exactly the same, and then their offspring is going to be genetically dissimilar to both the mother and the father. So in this slide, I included two photos. One is the copy of The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin, which he wrote on his voyage on the HMS Beagle. The second photo I thought was really interesting and really good about this PowerPoint because it shows that the shorter neck giraffes eventually will die out because they cannot reach their food supply. Therefore, they're not attaining their full fitness, they're not resourceful, and so the long neck giraffes will eventually flourish. They will produce together and produce more long neck giraffes because they are going to need to feed themselves. So, the RNA world. The problem for origin of life studies is to better understand how a protein-free RNA world became established on Earth. With many studies revolving around the origin of life and RNA world, many scientists believe that there was indeed a singular RNA world at one point in time during the life of history on Earth. So by this, we mean that there was once a world that didn't rely on the formation of DNA as well as proteins. I included a direct quote. So prebiotic chemistry and the origin of the RNA world. The demonstration that ribosomal peptide synthesis is a ribosomal catalyzed reaction makes it most certain that there was once an RNA world. So for a lack of better terms, when we hear RNA world, this simply means a time in history that RNA might have succeeded the formation of proteins as well as DNA. I included another direct quote from the same exact article. And finally, we see that the next step in understanding the basis of RNA/prebiotic world is the non-enzymic synthesis and copying of polynucleotides. So I'll just give you a quick minute to read over these quotes. Okay, moving forward. So the RNA world in action. I know that sometimes, especially for me when writing this paper, it was a little confusing to understand all of the nucleotides, nucleosynthesis, protein synthesis, cell membranes. So I found that this model was very resourceful. We start off with complex organic molecules produced by random chemistry. Then we move to the RNA world. Then eventually, as organisms become more complex, we develop proteins. And finally, we move to the double-stranded protein from single-stranded RNA because organisms are expanding, they are becoming more complex. So, natural selection inside of us. Believe it or not, natural selection is happening at a metaphysical level inside of us every day. Natural selection is not only seen on the physical level. By physical level, I mean through Darwin's studies that we see on his voyage, as well as natural selection through organisms in their habitats. Natural selection is also found with the bodies of organisms and works at the membrane level in multicellular organisms. Cellular metabolism is referred to as a sort of natural selection working in the cellular membrane in organisms. Natural selection works on bodies with three features: membranes, metabolism, and information. The information is gathered by the organism through the membrane as well as a process known as metabolism process. The membrane is where the cellular natural selection takes place. Metabolism is how an organism converts its food resource into different types of energy. Metabolism must include ATP, energy, as well as the capability of making cellular structures. Metabolism is the production of food into energy that organisms can use later. The only problem with this concept is understanding and explaining the origin of these features when natural selection is not present. We see this oftentimes with organisms that are not as adapted to multicellular organisms. We study these three bodies separately to understand how they work together in natural selection with membranes of multicellular organisms. And I included another direct quote from a different source, so I will give you just a second to read that. Okay, moving forward. Natural selection in our cellular membrane. I had a lot of trouble really understanding this topic when I was writing my paper, so I found that this diagram was very useful. So, adapting to your membrane. First bullet point states membranes need to be flexible but stable. Cholesterol makes the cell membrane rigid. Plants and animals who live in extremely hot temperatures are in danger of their membranes rupturing and leaking. Plants and animals who live in extremely cold temperatures are in danger of their membranes being too rigid and crystallizing. So, as eukaryotes have adapted their membrane through natural selection to have the right amount of cholesterol, glyproteins, and glycosaccharides in their environment. So, the dawn of Darwinian evolution. The dawn of Darwinian evolution is the prebiotic chemistry and primitive biology are understood to be on different sides of the big moment, quote unquote, of life. This level of complexity happened before there was a time where there was natural prebiotic environment, building blocks, and other components. Another direct quote was from a different article, and I will actually read this one because I found that it was very interesting. It as is, it as is, it as if primitive civilization had existed prior to the start of recorded history, leaving its mark in the foundation of modern civilization that followed. Although there may never be direct physical evidence of an RNA-based organism, because the RNA world is likely to have been extinct for 4 billion years, molecular archaeologists have uncovered artifacts of this ancestral area, none more pronounced than the recently reported crystallized structure of a ribosome. So, prebiotic chemistry studies the components of life before Darwinian evolution. In other words, what did we believe or know before Darwin? Primitive biology is the building block to understanding prebiotic chemistry and even Darwinian evolution. So, understanding evolution, we know this. We notice in this diagram that we start off with singular cellular organisms back billions of years ago, and we move forward to reptiles, amphibians, and finally humans at the very end of this diagram. RNA and DNA. Who came first? RNA was used for both genetic information and catalytic ability in the earlier recorded existence of the world. There was a huge moment in the scientific world in regard to whether or not protein synthesis arose before or after the formation of DNA. Studies show DNA arose after the formation of RNA because it is a protein. A direct quote which I thought was very useful was the historical evidence of the RNA world in which early life is used RNA for both genetic information and catalytic ability is widely accepted. However, there is little discussion of whether protein synthesis arose before DNA or what preceded the RNA world. The road to and from the RNA world is understanding how we were once an RNA world and how we finally became the world where RNA, DNA, and proteins make up the molecular body together. The next step in this quote unquote road is to and from RNA world is protein synthesis and DNA production. Finally, the last part is understanding this road is focused on the enhanced stability and reactivity of RNA molecules. So I included this diagram that DNA is a double-stranded protein and RNA is a singular, just to kind of let it sink in that, we at one point when we were singular cellular organisms were actually generally single-stranded, and as we move forward with the development of proteins, we became a DNA world. So my conclusion, this is directly from my paper, but I thought that it was a great wrap-up statement for this PowerPoint as well. In understanding natural selection, there is evidence found by Charles Darwin of what is happening in the physical world. However, there had been no evidence of natural selection within our bodies. Understanding the basis of an RNA world versus our current DNA world is how we can begin to comprehend natural selection within multicellular organisms. Although this might not be something we think about every day, we should still keep in mind that there is always more that meets the eye. So, understanding more, below I attached a short YouTube video to better explain / understand evolution as well as natural selection. Enjoy and have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and if you click the link or even copy paste it into Safari, Google Chrome, whatever browser you might use, it is just a short 8-minute video and it is very useful and helped me really write my paper, so I thought I would share it with you. So, yeah, thank you so much.